you don't really know who you are or what you are until you put a really big challenge in front of you.
Fear is an asset and ally here to help you be magnificent.
This crazy, silly, stupid idea to run across the Sahara Desert.
You did make it this time, but you said if you didn't make it, you would try again and again.
Everybody's connected to nature, connected to music, to their families, and now we're going to build a world that doesn't have racism and war and starving kids.
I kept telling myself, run at me, and just keep smiling.
Morning. Yeah, sorry, I'm actually, as you can see, homebound. I learned last night my husband had to leave this morning, so I'm here with the kids.
Okay, well, glad to hear he's out and about somewhere. So by the way, I'm recording now. Where are you?
I'm in my home office in outside of Cleveland, Ohio.
Excellent. So you guys aren't on lockdown anymore? Your husband's able to go to work?
His business is considered an essential service because he services the restaurant industry.
Oh, well, that's good. Hopefully the restaurants will start opening up soon.
Yeah, well, some of his customers are open for carryout and delivery, and they're increasingly, beginning to even open. The ones that closed are even opening up more and more for carryout.
So you're in your home office. I'm taking a little walk through my neighborhood right now. It's a beautiful day here in New York. Yesterday was gorgeous. There's a lot of people out, mostly keeping their social distancing, which is good. What's it like where you are? You're near Cleveland, right?
Yeah, so, yesterday was a beautiful day. We were out. The kids were having water balloon fights in the yard, so that was fun.
That's good.
I went for a walk and tried to enjoy the beautiful weather as much as we could.
Yeah. How old are your kids?
We're allowed to be out, walking, riding bikes.
Yeah.
Going to the grocery store if we need to.
How old are your kids?
I have 10-year-old twins.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I always wanted to be a twin. My college roommate was a twin. And before that, I always wanted to be a twin. I thought that was so cool.
Yeah. I wanted to have twins. I don't really know why. So I felt quite blessed that I had twins.
Excellent. So let's get into it. I met you because I was just on LinkedIn and I saw some kind of book that you posted about 6 mistakes philanthropists make. And I guess it was like an article or a pamphlet or something like that. And I read it. I was like, oh, this is really interesting. So I reached out to you. Can you just tell our members who are listening right now, hopefully walking and running along with us, a little bit about you?
Yeah, so I am a global philanthropy advisor, and I help donors and foundations and corporate giving programs of all sizes and types to really increase the clarity and impact and joy in their giving. I just wrote a new book, as you mentioned. It's called Delusional Altruism. And it's really all about how philanthropists, I believe, genuinely want to change the world and make a difference, but are often getting in their own way and preventing themselves from having the impact that they want. And so the book tries to show them how this happens. There are 7 manifestations of delusional altruism, and then what they can do to have a more transformational impact on their giving.
Is that like delusional optimism?
Maybe, yeah. I mean, I really believe that people want to do the right thing and make a difference, but like many of us, we get in our own way and we don't always realize it, and we're our own worst enemy in some cases.
So I want to ask you maybe to explain more about that, but what is a philanthropic advisor? Is that what you called it? A philanthropist advisor, a philanthropic advisor?
Yeah. So it's somebody who advises philanthropists on any aspect of their charitable giving. So that could be from creating a strategy, having a giving plan, figuring out what issues and causes are meaningful to you or your family or your company, and how you can create the greatest impact on whatever that issue or cause is. It also involves, everything from starting a foundation, how do you do that, setting up a donor advised fund, really any aspect, strategic or tactical, as it relates to allocating your funds, and not just your funds. You know, donors bring a lot more than money. They bring their connections, their knowledge, their smarts, you know, their experience to the table as well. But, you know, how do you allocate all of that for good?
And so what are some examples of the types of philanthropists that you work with?
Yeah. So corporations and their corporate giving programs. So like the J.M. Smucker Company, the maker of jams and jellies.
I like jam and jelly.
Which is right here in Northeast Ohio near me. Avery Dennison Foundation, Fujitsu, for example, other corporate funders. A lot of family foundations like Charles and Helen Schwab's Family Foundation, the Walton Family Foundation, some of the, you know, bigger ones, as well as lots of very small, you know, unknown, under the radar families and family foundations. Some of the big national funders that you might have heard of, the David and Lucille Packard Foundation, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, Annie E. Casey Foundation, and, you know, individual donors who aren't really necessarily have a foundation or any kind of affiliation, but want to give, want to contribute. And then increasingly, I'm working with family offices and wealth advisors. So these are, you know, firms that are helping families in a large part manage their wealth and ensure that their wealth lasts across generations. But often those same families, you know, want to give back. And so I help those family offices and wealth advisors to help their clients be more philanthropic and have a greater impact.
So, I mean, there's a lot I want to dig into. I mean, the people listening to this podcast, some of them may be that type of philanthropist, but I'm sure that most of the people listening to this podcast are not, you know, those types of high net worth families and net worth individuals. How should we all be thinking of ourselves with respect to our philanthropy?
Well, you know, a great starting point, and, you know, I like to keep things simple, is thinking about what do you want to accomplish and what's the best way to accomplish it. I mean, that's a good question for any aspect of life, right? So let's say you give away, you know, $1,000 a year, right? That could be a lot. So what do you want to accomplish with that $1,000? I mean, you could give, you know, $110 bills out to people. Or you could think about, you know, what are the issues that are meaningful to me or to my family, based upon, you know, your life experience or just what you've learned about in the world. And then, you know, what's the best way, or what are all the ways really that I could make a difference on that issue, and how could I allocate that $1,000 in such a way that would have an impact? So, you know, so pick an issue, pick any cause or problem in the world.
Let's say Parkinson's disease.
Okay, Parkinson's disease. So, you know, you could think about, well, what are all the ways that I could have an impact with my $1,000 on Parkinson's disease? So you could think about, you know, funding research, funding awareness. You could also think about, you know, do you want your dollars to go to a large national organization or some effort that's happening close to you in your community, a support group or something like that? You could also think about, how do you leverage your $1,000 with other people's money to have an even greater impact? And what else can you bring to the table besides your money, right? So you could be great at organizing events, and you could raise money or participate in some kind of charitable run or walk. Or you could, you know, think about, are there existing efforts where your money could be allocated along with other people's money for greater impact? And so you could also think about, you know, what other skills do you have? Are you a good writer? Could you write articles to raise awareness about Parkinson's? You know, can you identify maybe some unmet needs? One of the great uses of philanthropic dollars is to fund the things that no one else is funding, or to be that kind of riskier first money in. So, you know, there might be, I don't know, a support group or a need for a support group of children whose parents have Parkinson's. that might be an unmet need, and your $1,000 could be kind of the seed money to get that started.
How do you, I mean, what is like your process as an advisor for going out and figuring out that philanthropists, what that philanthropist should be doing with that $1,000? Is there like a process? Because like those are obviously a lot of things that you said that might work, but like what would be the process for somebody to determine what path is right for them, or what are the criteria that they would use to determine what's right for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I don't have like a set, you know, here's my 6-step process that I'm going to put you through, because I really believe that everyone is starting from a unique place. And me, advising is really about building a relationship and helping people understand where they're at right now and where they want to go, and the best way for them to get there. So, which is really not for me to decide. So honestly, it starts and stays for a while in a conversation. And, you know, I can help them to bring, you know, sometimes people have a lot of clarity. You know, they know what they want to do. They just don't know quite how to execute it. Sometimes people really have no idea. They're overwhelmed by the world's problems, right? There's a whole lot of things they care about. It's hard to pick. And so if that's where they're at, then maybe we could, you know, brainstorm what are some of the most compelling ones, and then talk through why are these most meaningful to you. Sometimes that even involves doing a little bit of research. You know, as I mentioned, one of my clients was the Charles and Helen Schwab Foundation, and they wanted to shift from being a more kind of responsive funder where they funded a whole variety of health and human service needs in their community to a more focused one. And they were very interested in a variety of issues. And so we actually kind of did some research on each of them to help them understand what kind of impact they could have. And that was a process that was helpful for them to make a selection ultimately of 3 different causes that they wanted to focus on at the time. But I mean, that's Charles Schwab. Obviously, that's a lot of money.
Right.
For an individual, I mean, the process is really the same thing. If you give $1,000 away, it's thinking about, you know, here's the 10 things that are meaningful to me. Do I want to spread my money out to have a little impact on a lot of causes, or would I rather pick 1 or 2, and then coming up with the right process to help narrow that down?
So, I mean, you wrote a book about the mistakes that people make when it comes to philanthropy. So there must be some things that they should do right, some principles that maybe should guide us in the way that we think about our philanthropy. And what you wrote about, I guess, was with respect to kind of was it with respect to the high net worth philanthropists that you're talking about, or is it something, are those principles that would apply to all of us as mini philanthropists?
You say mini philanthropists?
Yeah.
You know, they apply to everybody, really. I mean, the book is written more for higher wealth individuals and foundations, corporations, but I'm very clear that the principles apply to everybody. So, you know, one of the things, for example, is how feeling fearful and feeling overwhelmed hold donors back from having an impact.
Okay.
And I think right now we're recording this in the middle of the COVID pandemic, so we all feel a lot of fear and overwhelm, sometimes on a daily basis. But even in the best of times, this happens. So, you know, a donor who might be afraid literally of people finding out that he or she is wealthy and has access to money and is afraid of people changing their opinions about them, or kind of wondering who your friends are, because suddenly people are being very chummy with you. And so what that fear does, though, is it often causes donors to hold back and not give, or give anonymously, or just kind of, you know, prevent themselves from really focusing on their passions and having the greatest impact on what they care the most about. And so that's just a small example of how, you know, feeling fearful can hold you back. Another way a lot of funders experience delusional altruism is having a scarcity mindset.
Okay.
And so
What's that?
Yeah, so it means, despite access to wealth, if it's $1,000 or $100,000 to give, you have a scarcity mindset. You believe that the less you invest in yourself as a funder, and the less you invest in even in the nonprofit like capacity of the organization you support, the more money will go to the communities and causes you care about. Or another way to think about it is you believe that, kind of maintaining a Spartan operation for yourself as a donor equates to delivering more value. So let me give you two examples, one for the donor and one for the nonprofit. So for the donor, I believe that, to have the greatest impact you want to have on whatever issue it is, Parkinson's or disaster preparedness or whatever, you have to be the best donor you can be, the best philanthropist you can be. So that might be investing in your own knowledge, understanding of the issue. It might be for a larger donor, it could be investing in the right talent, advisors to help you, or even technology. A lot of foundations right now, or maybe let's say a month ago, desperately wanted to make rapid emergency response grants and literally couldn't because they had their only way to pay a nonprofit was through a physical check, and the checks were in their office and they were prevented from going in the building, right? Because they were on lockdown. So they literally couldn't, they had the money, they couldn't write a check to a nonprofit.
They couldn't just wire it through their computer?
They hadn't invested in their own technology to be able to have ACH payments and online payments. Mm-hmm.
That doesn't sound like a big investment. You can just log into chase.com and hit a couple buttons, right? Like, doesn't everybody have that?
As an organization, there's more to it to ensure compliance and tracking and security and things like that. So it's not a matter of figuring it out on the fly, like it would be for an individual.
Right.
And also, another way the scarcity mentality shows up is this belief that, nonprofit overhead is bad, right? So the whole notion of 99 cents of your dollar goes to help, support, poor people in Africa, and only 1 cent is spent on the organization. Well, that's just not realistic, right? Because organizations require employees, they require like electricity, computers, printers, strategy, infrastructure, finances, all that stuff costs money. And
I'm a big believer in overhead.
Yeah. And, a lot of businesses, a lot of donors are business leaders. They certainly invest in their own business development and infrastructure, research and development, technology, professional development of staff, having an HR function, all these things, right? To grow their business and ensure that they're continually innovating and responding to customer needs and so forth. And so, but all of that, part of the delusion is some of that, those smarts, like get tossed out the window when it comes to philanthropy. People think, oh, this is easy, and these nonprofits, don't deserve the best infrastructure, talent, technology, which is ridiculous, right? If you want your money to have the greatest impact, don't you want to allocate it to organizations that are doing their best work, have the best people, have the best technology, the best strategy, the best board of directors? Of course you do. And so that costs money, and you need to realize that kind of investment really pays off.
And, in a very important way right now, too, I see a lot of charities, unfortunately, have to, lay people off right now because of COVID and what it's done to the economy and what it's done to their fundraising operations. And, they're trying to keep this like magical 20% overhead number, and they're having to furlough people and lay people off, and it's awful. But at the same time, I feel like, all right, well, maybe now, pull back a little bit on the research side of it or whatever. Just make sure that you're keeping your people, because when this comes back, you're going to need those people to actually serve the mission. It's very concerning to me when I see what's happening to nonprofits right now. What are you seeing, by the way, with regards to how nonprofits are being affected at this moment, and maybe how philanthropists are being affected at this moment?
Yeah, I mean, for the nonprofits, I mean, it's huge. And of course, obviously it varies. Some nonprofits are doing very well because they're, receiving a tremendous amount of funding right now due to their role, right? If it's like food distribution.
Sure.
But a lot of nonprofits are suffering. And I think the nonprofits that are suffering the most are the ones that haven't been investing or been able to invest in their own infrastructure, systems, excellent boards, talented staff. And so the ones that are slow, the ones that, respond to this crisis with kind of a deer in the headlight, hiding under the covers, totally overwhelmed approach, and didn't have good sources of advice, if that's from executive coach or some kind of a peer network that they could really trust and rely on to get quick information and be able to execute on that. Because I think, this crisis, for many nonprofits, it felt like it came out of nowhere, and people had to make very quick decisions. I think the organizations that are going to survive this the strongest are the ones that were the strongest positioned going into this crisis, if that makes sense. Just take the example of getting federal funding, right? So the organizations, businesses and nonprofits that applied quickly are the ones that are getting the funds. I mean, the funding has run out. They renewed additional funding, but that could run out again, right? And so there's a lot of organizations, businesses and nonprofits that are going to be left behind from having any kind of, the payroll protection program, right, or any kind of loans to carry them through. And
yeah, honestly, I'll say, I applied for the payroll protection program, and it was hard. Like, you had to, all the documents that they required. And I'm, fortunate that I have a bookkeeper that was able to help me. And I have very little infrastructure myself and a very small team myself. But, if you're not organized, or you're not, don't have someone to help you get organized, it would be impossible to apply for that stuff. And I never hear anything back from the payroll protection people except to ask for another document, which I don't have. So I got to figure out where to find it. So if you don't have the
That's
support
exactly
to help you figure that out.
Right. So if you're a nonprofit and you're not on top of your books, and you don't know what your cash flow is, and you don't have accurate financial data at the ready, literally, then it would be very difficult to apply, and you can't scramble to get that information. It's too late.
Yeah. It's hard.
So that's what I mean. That kind of investment in yourself. It can't all be about helping your mission, right? I mean, it has to be. You can't meet the needs of the community you're trying to serve without helping yourself as an organization to ensure that you're going to be there over the long haul.
Right. And then to some extent, the people at your organization are the mission, right? You want more people working to cure Parkinson's disease, or working to, cure Alzheimer's disease, or whatever the cause is, than not. It's better to have more people. You've got to do it responsibly. And I'm assuming that most charities are doing it responsibly. A lot of people have a very cynical view of charities, which I don't understand, but everybody I've met at charities are really in it for the right reasons.
Yes. No, I agree. I mean, I think people would be surprised at how many nonprofit executive directors are getting paid for 20 hours of work a week and working 60 to 80 hours a week.
Yeah. I mean, I would love to see with what's going on in the economy right now, and so many people awfully lost their jobs. It's just terrible. I would love to see charities and nonprofits be the next big job creators.
Well, they already are. I mean, nonprofits comprise something like 10-13% of the American workforce. I mean, it is pretty.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's actually a pretty big part already. It's interesting. But, one of the risks of this, I think nonprofit leaders have been treated poorly in general, by funders who give money for programs and refuse to allow money to be spent on overhead and personnel and things like that. So they're constantly scrambling to quite frankly, come up with like make-believe budgets to kind of make the numbers work to appease the funders in this totally unrealistic situation. So that's exhausting. They often are unsupported by their board chairs. I mean, you'd be surprised at how many nonprofit executive directors to this day have not heard from the board of their board chair at all.
In what's going on right now?
Yes. And going into this, there was a concern about kind of the pipeline of nonprofit leadership and how many executive directors were feeling burnt out and weren't sure they were going to stay in their jobs for many more years. And I think coming out of this, there could be a leadership crisis in nonprofits that, once this crisis is over and we're in the recovery, there's going to be a lot of organizations that have lost their leadership that will just, toss the towel in and say, this is not worth it. Like, I can't function.
Wow. So what are some of the other kind of elements of delusional altruism that you wrote about in your book, and how are they kind of manifest? Because you literally published your book like right before this all happened. So I'm wondering also, how COVID may have illuminated or otherwise affected the things that you wrote about.
Yeah, my book published on March 24th. So it was smack in the middle of the beginning of the lockdown. And in some ways, not the best time to publish a book during a global pandemic and recession. But I was stunned really to realize how relevant all of the content is to what's happening right now. So one of the delusions that I talk about a lot lately is really not knowing where you're going as a funder. So not having a clear strategy to help guide you. And the problem with that is if you don't know where you're going, it's unlikely you're going to get there. And what a strategy does is very simply, it really provides a framework for decision making. So it allows you as the donor, if it's, your kind of your giving strategy as an individual or your grant making strategy as a large foundation, is to help you understand, who do you want to be a year from now? And where are you today? And what do you think is the best way to get from where you are today to where you want to be in a year? Like, it really is not that much more complex than that.
Mm-hmm.
And, what are the kind of the main things that you need to do? So let's say you suddenly, someone in your family has been diagnosed with Parkinson's, and you want to make a difference and have an impact. Well, so, where do you want to be a year from now? Could be, I want to have raised significant awareness about the need for research and treatment options for people with Parkinson's in my community. And where I am today is I barely know what Parkinson's is. This is just hitting me, right? And so, one of your how you get from where you are today to where you want to be is learning, right? You could invest a lot of time in learning about the disease and different approaches and strategies. Another could be you identify a handful of organizations that you think you want to support, and you meet with those executive directors and try to learn from them as to what they need. And thirdly might be, how has this pandemic impacted Parkinson's? It probably has, and what does that mean? And so it could be, people with Parkinson's, have lost access to treatment, or have lost, some ability to have caregivers, or whatever it might be, right? Mm-hmm. Those could be your three things to help you get from where you are today to where you want to be. And then it's a matter of allocating your time appropriately to making sure that you're focusing on those three things. And too often, funders do one of two things. One is they don't have a strategy. They're just kind of like doing stuff, right? They're making grants or supporting organizations. The downside is they're very busy, but their busyness is not allocated toward accomplishing specific goals. And so they do lots of stuff, but the stuff doesn't really add up to anything. And it's also very easy to get distracted by, we often talk about chasing squirrels or chasing shiny objects, right? Well, it's very easy to get distracted by, other opportunities if you don't know what you're trying to do as a funder. And so that's one problem, not having a strategy. The other one is spending a year to 18 months to come up with your 5-year strategic plan. And one of the delusions I talk about a lot is how slow philanthropy is. And so the idea, I mean, I think this pandemic has shown us the futility of spending a year to come up with a 5 or a 3-year plan.
Yeah, Mike Tyson said it.
Now will be
Everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face.
Exactly. And, you know, I mean, no one predicted a year ago.
But do those two things cut against each other? Like, you know, you want to put this. Yeah. Do those two things cut against each other? Like, you know, say, oh, I need to put the time into making my strategy, but I'm not going to put in so much time as to create a 5-year plan.
No, because I think a strategy you should think about a year out. So literally, like, what do I want to accomplish in a year? Who do I want to be in a year? What kind of impact do I want to have in the next year? And then how can you swiftly move to get to where you want to be? And I think, you know, I think funders, when they're effective, they're constantly learning, right? So they're continually learning, and that knowledge is infusing their thinking and their planning. So you don't have to stop and engage in a 6-month learning exercise, you know, in order to inform your strategy. It should be constant. Mm-hmm. But really, you know, especially in these times, we need to be aware of kind of our environment, conscious of what's going on in the world around us, and the impact that we're having within that. And, you know, creating your strategy is really, it can be done in a day. It can be done right now on Zoom over, you know, maybe let's say 2 to 3 hour blocks of time with your team or whoever it is, mm-hmm. if you're not all physically together. And you know, and staying focused on what you want to do and figuring out the best way to do it, and then doing it, right? And having the confidence that you can change course along the way. You can check in with yourself every quarter and see what things need to be adjusted. And then in a year, you do the process again and you say, okay, well, what have we accomplished? How much progress did we make? Is this still our strategy, or what's changed? And what do we want to accomplish in the next year, and adjust accordingly? If you keep it going at that pace, then you're constantly focusing on what's most important. You're doing it in a way that is sentient. You know, you're aware of your environment and your and the impact that you're having, and you have clarity on what you want to accomplish.
It's interesting. So I used to do a lot of triathlons, and I'm a mediocre swimmer. Like in the pool, like I was the slowest of my friends in the pool. But whenever it was in the race, I'd be the first one out of the water, because like you're swimming in the open water is different than swimming in the pool. It's very chaotic. There's a lot of people around you. There's a lot of thrashing. There's no like line on the bottom of the pool that you can follow. You're not like going in a straight line. And the reason I was always the first out of the water is that instead of swimming like the proper way, where you turn your head to the side to breathe, I always pick my head up in front of me, which is the improper way, so that I could see where I'm going every single stroke. And so that helps me, you know, constantly adjust and not make sure that I go off course. So I'm always able to adjust and kind of deal with, you know, whoever's next to me hitting me, or make sure that I'm not like veering off 500 yards to the right. And, you know, people, you know, sometimes they keep their head down and they're not looking where they're going, and they're, you know, veering, and they end up swimming another like 300 yards, or, you know, swimming very far out of the way, which obviously slows them down. So I always find that like going a little bit slower, but always looking to see where you're going and making small adjustments is really helpful. Not necessarily having that like plan that, you know, this is my plan, head down, and I'm going to go at it. And all of a sudden you look up and you're in the wrong place.
That's exactly right. That's a great analogy. And I've participated in one triathlon, and I know exactly what you're talking about, that open water, like flailing around. No, that's right. Because, and I think especially now in this crisis, it's the people that are keeping their heads up, you know, that are the ones that are going to do the best, because they're staying focused on where they're headed. And as you said, making course corrections along the way. There's a lot of people who, you know, who have their heads in the sand. And, you know, the only way they're going to figure out that there's a recovery is when they hear the people running past them, you know, who have their heads up, who are staying focused, who are being innovative, who are adapting and adjusting to what's going on.
Something else that I wanted to ask you. So when it comes to the strategy, something that I'm hopeful about is just a reprioritization and a rethinking of the way that we think about charity. Because, you know, these people that you're, and this is going to sound like I'm picking on the wealthy people. I'm not, because I think it applies to all of us. You know, they've been very successful in their life, and now they're deciding to give back, right? Yeah. They've made a lot of money, and they're deciding to give back. And that was actually the model that I have. You know, I started Charity Miles in honor of my grandfather, who had Parkinson's, and he was successful and gave a lot of money back to charity. And like, I really looked up to that a lot. And it wasn't until recently that I really kind of figured out that, like, we have to reprioritize that so that it's not just about giving back after you've made a lot of money. You have to, I think that we need to change just the way that we live and reprioritize, you know, the little decisions that we make every day, not just for the big wealthy philanthropists, but all of us. Like, what do we eat for lunch? How does that affect Parkinson's disease or any other health issue that we might care about? Because, you know, I care about Parkinson's disease right now, and I always will, because of the people that I've met through the Michael J. Fox Foundation and what it means to me through my grandfather. But, you know, I also don't want to get cancer, and I also don't want to get heart disease, and I also don't want to, you know, there's all these other health causes that I care about. So, you know, we just have to see the bigger picture and what does it mean if you care about Parkinson's disease, you care about health, and how do you reprioritize health in the way that you live, in the way that we live? And I'm hoping that, you know, right now there's more people out walking by me than I would typically see, because people are reprioritizing health, which I think is great. And you don't necessarily, it's not a strategy, I don't think. It's people out walking their dogs and walking with their kids, but how do we reprioritize the things that we care about? Because if you're giving money to charity, you care about something. So how do you make that more of a priority in your life? Mm-hmm. Not just an afterthought that you do after work.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I completely agree. And to me, it's really about how do you bring your whole self to contributing to the world and to helping others. And, you know, a lot of it has to do with your values. And I think it's helpful as individuals and families to have clarity on what you value. And how does that manifest in your life? How does that manifest in how you choose to spend your time, how you treat each other, how you treat others, what you choose to purchase? You know, all kinds of decisions. It really should manifest itself in every aspect of your life, right? And I completely agree with you. And certainly, you know, teaching the value of giving back to children in whatever ways are developmentally appropriate, and helping others, sharing, you know, even volunteering, and, you know, and in all aspects of your life. I mean, just think about, you know, a typical example of in a larger foundation is, you know, you give this money away, but that's usually like 5% of your assets a year. Mm-hmm. What are all your assets doing invested in the stock market? And are they causing damage, or are they actually being deployed for good as well? And so again, bringing your full self as an individual, a business leader, an investor, and a philanthropist, and not waiting until the end of your
if you're giving money for education, but at the same time, like, not paying taxes which support education, right? Like, or, you know, you got to think about it from the big picture. I guess that depends on what you really want. Do you want to support the education, or do you want to be seen as a philanthropist that's supporting education? Mm-hmm. Not to be too provocative.
Well, there is a lot of ego in philanthropy, that's for sure.
What are some of the people that you work with doing now? How have they adapted to coronavirus?
Yeah. Well, I would say a couple ways. One is they are, you know, to the best of their abilities, rapidly deploying funding. Mm-hmm. often, either giving to their existing grantees additional money, or funding local kind of first responder type organizations, the safety net organizations, as well as taking their existing grants and telling their grantees, you're allowed to spend this money however you want to. So they're removing all the restrictions. So maybe the grant was specifically for, running a preschool program, right? Well, that can't happen because you can't go to preschool right now. So they're basically saying to the nonprofit leaders, hey, look, we completely trust you to make the best decision right now, given what's going on. So you can repurpose this grant to meet whatever needs you have. And, at the end of this, we'll check back in with you. So they're really rapidly increasing the trust of their nonprofits and making it easier for the nonprofits to use the money they have in the ways that they see most important right now. Which, for many funders is a big shift. As I mentioned, kind of there's this scarcity mindset where that says that part of that is like wanting to maintain control, right? And that control manifests in, not trusting grantees to do the right thing, providing tight restrictions on the funding, and how it can be used and how it can't be used, a lot of requirements in terms of reporting and things like that. And it's really amazing to me how quickly many funders are dropping all of these requirements and just saying, you need this, here it is, go for it, and we'll check back in with you. And don't even worry about writing a report. Like, we'll call you and we'll write the report for you because we know that you're really busy doing a lot of, rapid response work, which is really amazing. So my hope is, quite frankly, that sticks. These new best practices stick after the crisis is over.
And what should our members be doing right now?
Well, I'd say three things. I'd say think about, let's just assume you have a certain amount of money you tend to give away each year, 500, 5,000, whatever it might be. I'd think about, what are the causes that you typically contribute to, and how might they be impacted by what's happening? And what might that mean in terms of how you change how you give? So let's say you typically give at the end of the year, right? Like in December, right before, to get your tax benefits and whatnot. Well, you might think about, what do these nonprofits need right now? And should we speed up decision making and get money out the door now to help support them? You might also,
I endorse that. Get it out now.
You might also think about joining forces with a local community response fund. So in most communities across the country and in places around the world, funders have come together to pool resources and allocate them quickly to a wide variety of organizations. And you can find this if you go to the website of the National Center for Family Philanthropy and look at their, they have a COVID page or something with all their resources, and they actually are mapping all of these different response funds. So you can literally find your community on the map. And so the value of this is you could be pooling your $5,000 with $5 million that are being generated by some major donors and companies. But what you have is the talented knowledge of professional philanthropists who know the community, who know these organizations, who are doing all the vetting, and they're making sure that, the food bank needs money, but if everyone only gave to the food bank and no one gave to the homeless shelter, the domestic violence organization, the, schools, whatever, then there'd be a problem, right? So they're making sure that the money is dispersed across a wide variety of needs, and they're doing all the work for you. So that's a really good way to go. And then the third thing I think about is, in any kind of crisis, if it's a flood or a hurricane or an earthquake, there's 4 phases, right? There's the immediate crisis and immediate response, which everyone is where most of the money gets poured into. But then there's the next phase of recovery, right? So how do you get people back to work? How do you make COVID tests are created and distributed. And then thirdly, like reform. So that's, how do we need to change systems to make sure this doesn't happen again? Like, how do we beef back up the public health system in this country so that when the next pandemic comes, we're not, in the same position we are today? And then fourth is resiliency. So how do we make sure that we don't just bounce back from this crisis, but bounce forward? And so donor, what you want to think about is, how do I want to contribute right now to the immediate response and immediate needs, but also how do I want to contribute down the road to recovery or improving, healthcare systems or public health systems or things like that?
Well, that's a lot there for us to be thinking about. Are there any, so I just want to give a quick plug to one of our partners based off of something that you just said, is the United Way. They're doing a phenomenal job. They've raised a huge fund that they're deploying through the 211 program, which I didn't know about, but apparently, like, wherever you are, you can dial 211 and get help with just about anything you need. Yep. And because of that program, they know, very in detail what communities need, what things, and what, where resources need to be allocated and where. It's amazing. And so, it's not just like giving money and like it's all going into a glut of, food necessarily, when food might not be the thing that area needs. So very impressed with what the United Way is doing. And it's a great way to leverage the money that you're going to give with not only other people's money and other corporations' money and other philanthropists' money, but with expertise and the resources to make sure that the resources get to where they need to go.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Because as an individual, like, you might know that you want to help first responders, or you might know that people who are experiencing child abuse or domestic violence are probably, in very precarious, scary positions right now. But you don't know who to help or how to help, right? You don't know what the right organizations are. And so I think that's a huge value of like a United Way or your local community foundation, because as you said, these are organizations that are set up to understand what the community needs are and understand the different nonprofits that are supporting them. And they have a lot of knowledge about which ones are effective and not effective. And so, going to those websites, your local community foundation website or your local United Way, should provide a lot of information for you. And also, again, like pooling your money with the funds that they're creating and contributing to those is a great way to respond with the confidence, that your money will be well allocated.
And then on the flip side of that, maybe not the flip side, but another example, which is not a huge organization, is a friend of mine from high school, Danielle Zachman. She was talking to a friend of hers who was working at a hospital. He's like, well, what do you need right now? She's like, well, to be honest, like, we don't even have time to eat because like we're working so hard and we're just working around the clock. So Danielle set up a Venmo account. She's not a 501c3. She just set up a Venmo account, help the first responders. And she started posting videos on Facebook and TikTok with her kids dancing, saying, if you donate, we'll dance. And she raised like $30,000 and they've provided, and also the cool thing is they're using the money to buy food from local restaurants, which would otherwise be going out of business right now. Buy the food from the local restaurants and bringing it down to the hospitals to feed the doctors and the nurses and the people in the hospitals who are working around the clock. And I think they've provided like 3,000 or 4,000 meals already to these people, and also helped the restaurants, which are for-profit businesses, but need to be helped. And we need to support our restaurants and all the local businesses in our community so that we can have a recovery here. I just thought it was genius what she did. Mm-hmm. And it didn't take any, like you said, it was just rapid. It wasn't like, oh, I need to make a big plan here and, set out a 18-month objective or something. It was like, set up a Venmo account and post a dancing video on TikTok. And that was it. So
yeah, that's great.
We all have the capacity to help.
Right. Bring all your talents to the table and then for that matter, your children's talents, right?
Exactly.
That's awesome.
So cool. So I really appreciate you taking the time to share all this with us. Is there any kind of last call to action that you'd like to make?
Well, sure. I mean, I would love for your listeners, if they're interested, to purchase my book, Delusional Altruism. Yep. And you can simply go to delusionalaltruism.com. And from there, there's all kinds of links. You can buy it on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and a host of other places. But I think it'll be, again, for any size giver, I think it'll provide you with a lot of insight as to, some of the ways you might be getting in your own way and ways that you can have a more tremendous impact on whatever issue or cause you care about.
Excellent. Well, I really appreciate it. Thanks for doing this with me this morning. And thanks to everyone out there for hopefully walking or running along with us with your face masks on. I got mine here just in case I see anybody. And Kris, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you for having me.
All right. Every mile matters. Bye.
Bye-bye.